Good evening, good evening. How are you doing? Would appreciate if you could let me know all the technology is working as usual. I've just gone live and I'm always nervous at the start of these talks because I've had a few technological issues, to be fair, with the live talk. So drop us a hello. I can see Becky is saying hello there. So Becky, it's obviously beaming out over Facebook. Can you hear me okay, Becky? Everything is coming through uninterrupted, I presume, if you're saying hello there. Just come back with a little comment, guys, and the usual give me that reassurance that I know you can definitely hear me. There's Declan, Dave is saying hello, Christopher's saying hello. How's it going, guys? You well? So if you can notice this week that the last couple of live events that I've tried to do, I've had all sorts of technical issues because I'm trying to stream the live shows through Facebook and YouTube, and also get the sound right. And anyway, it's been a whole quagmire of technical difficulties, and I think I have it right now because I can see all the people are coming in telling me the sound is good and telling me things are working. And I'm even going to check over here on the YouTube side, and let's see, can I see myself here on YouTube? I think it's working there as well. I think everything is as it should be. There I am. I'm coming back at myself across the screen. So thanks so much for joining tonight. It's great to have everyone along. If you're in Ireland and you're joining, especially thanks to you because the weather is glorious. But then again, this is Dublin. This is, glorious weather is how we do it at the moment. It's pretty much just sunny every day. So, taking the evening off in that context is, well, it's still good. It's still good. It's amazingly sunny out there at the moment, which, if you're not from Ireland, you probably know anyway, it's most unusual. It's most unusual. So the theme of this evening's conversation is to talk about Lightroom versus Photoshop. And I kind of teed it up that way a little bit in the titling deliberately to kind of, I don't know, stir up a little bit of a conversation. And I have to say, it was interesting. I really felt maybe people misconstrued what I was going to say here this evening because, I saw the comments on the ad for the event and stuff, and folks were arguing about, was Photoshop valid or was editing valid as a concept, basically, to edit your pictures. Did your pictures stop being real, or are your pictures not pictures because you've edited them in Photoshop or Lightroom? And I guess for my own purposes this evening, it's not really to discuss the $1 million question, what's better, Nikon or Canon? That's easy, it's Nikon, that's an easy one. No, it's not to discuss the $1 million question of what's better, Lightroom or Photoshop. It's to give you an idea how I use both, and show you some of the stuff, for example, that you can do in Photoshop that you can't do in Lightroom, and also show you just some editing in both. So while the title is Lightroom versus Photoshop, I want this also to feel like a general editing session, so you should get something out of that in terms of your editing. Really importantly as well, I have, as you can see, set up this wide angle camera now, so there can be no doubt, because it is the summer and I am most definitely having a glass of wine by Thursday. So I've got myself a little Nebbiolo here from Italy, Langa Nebbiolo 2019. Good little year for the Nebbiolos. I have to admit as well that my wife's friend is visiting from Croatia this evening, so I may have had a couple of glasses of Chardonnay before I even came online, and I've already had a couple of glasses of the red. So I really hope that I can keep it together to give you a good presentation tonight. But I'm feeling confident. So loads of comments coming in, guys. Thanks so much for everybody for joining us. People are saying they can hear it loud and clear. There's Mary. Hello from the sunny southeast. How are you, Mary? Sunny southeast, Wexford, Waterford. Whereabouts, Mary? Nowhere better. I love Carn myself. Many a year spent down there. Yana is there. Declan Clark is saying new office. No, not new office, Declan. I just new camera setup, a new manipulation of how the office is presented. And if you saw really what the office looked like, you'd be shocked, Declan, because I have the camera at a good angle now, so it just shows the wine in the corner, me in the middle, and then if I look down to my left, there's just that's where the pile of stuff of everything that's been thrown. So I've managed to, like any good photographer, being able to manipulate the elements into a way that's presentable for the viewer. But it's definitely not a new office, and as I said, if you saw it properly, you'd know it wasn't a particularly clean office either. But that's not my thing. People are coming in from Canada. Steve Smith, Steve Crozier is there. How are you, Steve? And Declan says you have to have a glass on a sunny day. No doubt, Declan. So with that final comment, I'll have my little sip before I start talking, and let's do some editing. So I want to kind of try and throw around some specific ideas of this Lightroom versus Photoshop from my own end. If you asked me, could I only have one for the rest of my life, it would definitely be Photoshop. Absolutely no question it would be Photoshop, because Photoshop is a more powerful tool. I mean, in terms of editing, you can be more specific where you edit, you can be more targeted, it can be more controlled. It has a greater variety of tools to make selections, to make masks, to edit locally, which is a real key part of my post-processing. So if you said just one, definitely Photoshop, because it can do that. But also in addition to that, Photoshop has Camera Raw, which basically has all the editing functions that Lightroom has. So Photoshop, in terms of the edit, has everything and way more than Lightroom, and that's a fact. What I will say though, Photoshop does not have, that Lightroom has, is a whole system for managing your photographs. There's no question Lightroom, you can catalog, you can make slideshows, you can use GPS coordinates on maps, things like that. More accessible functionality rather than very detailed technical functionality for editing your shots. So Photoshop is better at targeting specific areas, I would say. Lightroom is a more all-round package, which I think is why it's more popular with a lot of people. But that's not really to diminish how good Lightroom is for targeting editing, because Lightroom is also superb at masking, and while it's not quite as good as Photoshop, it is superb. There's absolutely no question about that. So what I normally say to folks who are kind of having this debate in their mind is that so I'm going to start again. Lightroom is normally what people try to learn first. It's the more accessible software and what people jump into. And if you're not creating good directional shape in your pictures in Lightroom, I would forget about trying to learn Photoshop. Because really, the whole purpose, or the raison d'etre of editing is to direct the viewer through the picture where you want them to look, to lighten the parts of interest with more contrast, to create a directional shape in your picture. So if you're not able to create a directional shape in your picture in Lightroom, you certainly won't be able to do it with the more advanced tools in Photoshop. So that's where I would come from with it in respect of going with one or the other. If you feel that Lightroom is limiting your ability to target specific areas of the picture, then I would try and move on to Photoshop. And I've put a link in the description of this video on YouTube anyway, and basically there's a link to Photoshop Fundamentals. That's the first video you should start off with if you really want to learn about Photoshop. It kind of breaks down how masking works and white reveals and black conceals and all these sorts of things. Just getting a message saying the audio is dropping out. I'm not sure why that is, guys. Let me just check my internet connection. Should be connected there. Shouldn't be any issues. Maybe come in with a comment, guys, and let me know. Can you hear now? I've just made an adjustment to the microphone. It might be my internet here is creating an issue. I've just moved the microphone a little bit, so perhaps you could just let me know if you can hear me okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why it's dropping for a few people, so it must be me. It's potentially my internet. Could be the issue. Can't hear, it's so quiet. Okay, here we go. I'm going to fix the microphone there a little bit, so hopefully that's better. Just let me know, can you hear now, guys? Okay. Photoshop needs a bigger boat. Definitely my choice. Audio is low. Okay, so I'm going to just turn up that audio a little bit because I can see that's a problem for a few people. So I've just turned that up now, guys. So just maybe you could let me know if you can hear a little bit better. I'm not sure, my internet could be a little bit jumpy, but normally it's okay. So I'm going to just keep going, guys, because I've turned the audio up there. And Vince says it's okay now, so I'm gonna keep going with it. So that's my take on would I use Lightroom or would I use Photoshop. I'd ask myself first of all, am I able to create good directional shape in Lightroom? And if I'm able to create good directional shape in Lightroom, then it might be worth considering learning some of the technical skills in Photoshop. But what I'm going to do in this talk is I'm going to break down a set of scenarios where we look at which software I use for what task, and hopefully that'll help you to make an more informed decision about what software you need to use yourself. As I said, I use both, but hopefully the context in which I use them will be useful to you. And you know, I don't profess to be an absolute total expert in this in respect of knowing where every button is in each software, but I know what works for me, and I'm happy to share that this evening. So if there's any sort of questions at the outset that anybody has that they'd like to ask, or that they'd hoping that I deal with this evening, feel free to pop them in the comments. I have the comments box working there, and I can kind of see everything that's coming in. So I will certainly jump in and keep an eye on that for any comments that come in. But first of all, I am going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see Lightroom now. And I've opened up these pictures. These are images that I photographed for my wife. She's a jewelry designer, and when I do photo shoots for her, I have to photograph multiple jewelry pieces. Okay, I joke that you know, there's not many people that have their own personal photographer in the industry, but she is definitely one that has her own personal photographer. So for me, the context with this is using Lightroom to batch process. I find Lightroom much better to edit multiple pictures. Just the way you'd have 50, 100 images sometimes in a folder, and Lightroom is much easier to access information like that. It groups things better together a little bit. It has a better history. I find it easier and quicker to move between multiple files. So if we take a look at some of these pictures here, and you'll see with these images that they have a very similar sort of finishing stylistically to them. Very similar. I mean, the lighting was the same that I shot them in, but also the finishing is very similar. So I find Lightroom much easier to batch process images like this. And when I say batch process, I mean apply the same changes that I've applied to one to all the files. They'll still need individual tweaking, but I find it much easier in Lightroom to create this sort of consistency and to manage batch processing jobs like this. And if I look at a raw file from this shoot here, for example, and I just come in and go into the develop module here in Lightroom, and I just hit reset. So that's where I started with this file. I probably should have reset all these files before I started. That would have been useful. Let's just call that operator error, and let's reset them there. Okay, do it individually just to make my life nice and interesting. The things you forget to do. Here we go. Okay, they're all reset now. Okay, so if I wanted to batch process these files, I find Lightroom much easier, even though you can, of course, sync images across in Camera Raw, which is part of Photoshop. It's just a little bit easier in Lightroom. So if I were to, let's say, lighten this, make it a bit cooler, open the shadows a little bit, throw a radial filter on there in the face to make it lighter, something like that. That's just a very quick edit on this file. I can easily just, with the first file selected, select the rest of the files, hit sync, make sure I hit check all to apply all the changes from the first file to the additional 4 files that are in that stream there, and hit synchronize. And it will apply the changes I made to the first file to the other 4 files. So that's something that Lightroom is absolutely brilliant for. And whenever I have a big batch of files I want to do, I'm always in Lightroom. Always, always, always in Lightroom. I have to say though, when I edit landscape pictures, which is kind of where we're coming from with this evening's talk, I don't batch edit landscape pictures ever. I find that when I'm shooting the landscape, the light, I mean, look, I shouldn't say I don't batch ever, because sometimes what I'll have is I'll have 5 or 6 files that are very similar, and I might apply adjustments to one and then sync it to the other 5 just to get a feeling for what file I actually want to go deeper in the edit in. But I'm not kind of doing that with a view to finishing the edit or exporting the edit with that syncing. So landscape pictures I tend to edit individually. And when I'm looking at individual pictures, for me like that, I'm looking in something like Photo Mechanic normally, which is quite quick to view your files, or Bridge, and I'm just pulling a single file from there directly into Photoshop, and it opens up in Camera Raw. Now remember, the editing functions of Camera Raw are the exact same as the editing functions of Lightroom. So it's the same tools, and I work extensively in there. And that's not a right or a wrong per se, it's just I'm used to doing it that way. But again, if I'm comparing the two softwares in this context, Lightroom definitely has an advantage for batch editing. There's absolutely no question about that. I'm interested just kind of in people that are out there that are watching the video now. I mean, just throw into the comments, are you Lightroom or are you Photoshop user, or both? And it'd just be interesting to get a quick vote on how many people are using what software, you know. Just give us a quick sense of the numbers. My feeling is that way more people are using Lightroom than are using Photoshop and Camera Raw, and people are kind of afraid of Photoshop is my general experience. That sort of concern that it's almost like having the seatbelt taken off or something like that, and that can be quite worrying for people with their editing. But yeah, throw me in a comment there and let me know which software you're using. I'm just going to have my phone here for a second to make sure that I haven't gone offline. Lightroom, grew up with Photoshop, use more than Lightroom. So that's kind of, even from the first kind of 5 or 6 comments, I can see Steve Crozier is using Photoshop for over 25 years. The sharpening control, that is an issue again, and that kind of comes back to, though, Steve, if we're going to say the sharpening control is an issue in Lightroom, let's say that being able to selectively adjust in Lightroom is not as good as it is in Photoshop. So I normally sharpen through masks. Basically, I'll decide a part of the picture that I think is most interesting, and I'll generally sharpen through luminosity masks. And that's why, Steve, when you print the pictures or frame the pictures, sharpening just looks so perfect. Joking aside, you know, being able to selectively adjust like you can a bit better in Photoshop is useful for sharpening. I think Steve makes a good point. Interesting though, again, Maria saying Photoshop only. A few people saying Photoshop, Camera Raw, but more definitely saying Lightroom, which is the general experience that that I have with people coming on the workshops and things like that over the years. I think you know, learning Photoshop, the issue is that it's a steep learning curve. It's a steep learning curve to understand how layers work and how masks work. And if you don't understand how layers and masks work, then, you know, there's no advantage to being in Photoshop. And people find that aspect of it quite confusing. I would say, and I did mention, I put the link in the description, but definitely check that out, the Photoshop Fundamentals video there. That'll give you a great insight into the basics of Photoshop, which will get you started if you really want to go that way. So let's talk about some of the more practical things between the two. So if we look at Lightroom and we say how it's developed, particularly over the years, okay? And we go to the Develop module and we open up the masking panel here. you know, really the ability to make selective adjustments in Lightroom has improved exponentially in the last 3 or 4 years. Been able to select objects, subjects, sky selections. You can add and subtract masks. You can intersect masks. You can make color range selections. You can make luminosity selections in Lightroom, though I would strongly advise you never to do that because it absolutely ruins the contrast and it's a terrible idea and it really doesn't work well in Lightroom. But your ability to make selective adjustments in Lightroom has improved massively and is really superb now compared to what it used to be. I would say though again that if you really want to make aggressive changes to your pictures, then the masks in Lightroom will often fall down versus the accuracy of the masks in Photoshop. And really specifically what I'm talking about there is using luminosity masks. And we're going to get right into that this evening because that's an important part of the discussion. Christopher's asking me to say, can I compare LR and LRC? I mean, honestly, Christopher, I'm sorry, but I don't use the LR at all. I see people again coming on the workshops that have the LR on an iPad or things like that, and my very cursory knowledge of the two is that LRC seems to have a more wide and varied functionality in terms of the adjustments that you can make to your pictures. But I'm saying that from a pretty uneducated position because I don't use the regular, the LR, let's call it, versus the LRC. Vince is asking me, can you expand on how using luminosity in Lightroom is detrimental? Yeah, sure, I can expand on that. I think that's a pretty easy one to expand on. So if we're come to grab the range mask down here, and underneath the range mask we have luminance range. And in theory what luminance range is meant to do is it's meant to select the shadows or select the highlights, and from there we can adjust the bright areas and the dark areas of the picture. So if I click on luminance range, and this little slider opens up here, and if I pull it from the left to the right, you can see it's targeting in on the highlights, the red area is selected. Or if I pull it the other way, whoops, from right to left, it's targeting in on the shadows. Okay, so let's say I wanted to try and select this rock, for example, and that should be a reasonably targeted selection in the rock. What I find is that when I try to adjust something like that, I find that it makes the contrast really funky. Okay, I know that that's not like a particularly articulate way to describe the situation, but it does make the contrast funky, and I can see it there already. Look, if I turn this luminance mask on and off, you see what it's done in here. Look at the area in here around where the reflection of the rock is. If I just zoom in there and I turn that on and off, it's so unnatural looking. Look at the halo in here. Turn it on and off again. It's removed all the texture from the water. Turn it on and off again. And when we've tried to open up the shadows in this picture, while it has opened the shadow detail in the rock, and it's done okay there, it's made the contrast look really funky in another part of the picture. And that's my experience with using the luminance masks in Lightroom, is it makes the contrast look funky. And it doesn't matter if it's the highlights aspect of it or the shadows aspect of it, it just looks really odd. And I do understand that we can feather those masks by pulling this arrow a little bit left or right, but even if I feather the mask, which might improve it a little bit, to me it still looks very odd to jump between the shadow area and the highlight area. The more we feather it, the less the funkiness should be, but the more we feather it, the less targeted it is. Okay, so it's not as bad when it's fully feathered there, but again, I would argue that we've lost all texture in this area of the picture here, look. And while it has opened up the shadows, it's done it at the detriment of a significant portion of the rest of the picture. So my advice, guys, is avoid using that luminance range selection. I'm going to fix my microphone a little bit because I notice it's possibly not in the perfect place. So just bear with me. Thanks, Vince. Occasionally use it on the sky. Yeah, avoid like the plague, in my opinion. Avoid like the plague. If I want to open up shadows in a specific area of the picture, like let's say I wanted to open up the shadows on the rock here, because the rock is so shapely, what I might do is just use the subject select, and I'm pretty sure it's going to grab the rock pretty nicely. There we go. And I might just open the blacks a little bit and open the shadow slider just a little bit, and now my shadows are targeted into that place. If I didn't have a very clear subject like the rock here, I might use a radial filter and open up the shadows with the radial filter, but never the luminance range. So before I get into a couple of more in-depth things on this, one of the things where I definitely prefer Photoshop over Lightroom, although Lightroom has improved again exponentially, I would say, in this context, is the ability to remove objects from your frame. So let's say we wanted to get rid of all the rocks around this central rock here. If we're in Lightroom, there's a number of functions in here now. We have an eraser, we have a kind of a function which is healing brush, we have a clone, and the first one is the remove tool, which is a generative AI tool. And I have to say the generative AI tool has improved so much in Lightroom. So if I select the rock there, okay, once we've select the rock with the generative AI, we can then press remove, and I'm pretty sure it's going to remove this rock really nicely, really cleanly, although it hasn't done a great job there. But we can generate another option. Let's hit generate, and it should generate another option for us. And what I was going to say is that the functionality, and it still hasn't removed a great generate again. So after bigging up Lightroom for this, it's letting me a little bit down in the rock. Having said that, I'm trying to remove a rock in the center of other rocks. What I'd probably be better doing in this context is working left to right, because it'll make things a little less confusing for the software, because we're trying to remove a rock in a sea of rocks, essentially. See, that's better now. You can see that that's removed that nice and cleanly. And that's a good general point for trying to remove objects from pictures, trying to remove them in a way that you're essentially creating clean space as you go. So when I remove this one, I don't create clean space because there's rocks on either side of it still. So I'm going to work left to right now, and it'll probably work a lot better. So it's doing a semi-decent job. I have to say there's still marks there, and it still looks a little bit funky. That's pretty much the best Lightroom can do in regards to removing things, is this generative tool. If we were to, for example, just reset this picture for a moment, we were to use the healing brush, you can see you can move this around to select a specific part of your picture, but again, it looks a little muddy in there. You know, I just don't feel that this tool is great. It leaves a little bit of harshness around the edge, okay? So for me, even though this generative tool has improved hugely in Lightroom, I still feel Photoshop is infinitely better. And what I will also say about the generative tool in Lightroom is it's very slow. It's extremely slow. So typically, if I'm editing a picture and I do pretty much everything in Lightroom, but I need to remove something, I will nearly always bring it over to Photoshop to do the removal. And I'm just going to bring it over quickly and just show you a couple of the functions in Photoshop. And as that opens, that gives me time to pour my wine. If you expand the selection, you might be able to help the AI have a more sampled background to sample from, Christopher is saying. Yeah, I mean, look, with it, Christopher, yeah, I could maybe increase the sample, create more iterations, generate more potential fills, let's call it. But ultimately, my experience is that Photoshop is just much better at this than Lightroom, just much better. So let's say if I went to use the spot healing tool, which is not even the remove AI tool, and I just start spotting over these rocks like this, you can see, even though that's not perfect, that it's doing a better job. Okay, and that is with Photoshop's most basic tool for removing parts of your picture. It also has a generative AI with the remove tool. And if we come in here with the remove tool, and let's just be aggressive here and see how it does. Again, it's slower when you use the generative AI, probably similarly slow to Lightroom, but what I find better about Photoshop in terms of the speed is that I can try and go to the healing brush first, which will do a semi-decent job, and I mightn't even have to use the generative AI. So for example, in this case, it's cleaned most of it up, and I can go back to the spot healing and just clean up the other little bits around the edges, or the other little problems that have been created. Okay, so for me, and that's not done a great job over that side, to be fair. So if I'm having a problem, you can see over here it looks a bit blotchy. I'm going to go back in my history and redo the main one. And if it looks a little bit blotchy and I'm not happy with it, I will go to the remove tool and just make it a little bit smaller, because it definitely does a better job. So to round on it, I never used to try and remove anything in Lightroom because it was so crap, for want of a better description. But I do think that the generative AI is a huge step up in terms of what Lightroom can do. So if I'm in Lightroom and I'm editing a file in Lightroom and I don't feel like I need to bring it to Photoshop for contrast or luminance adjustments or things like that, I will try to remove it in Lightroom. And sometimes it does a decent job. But if it's in any way complicated, I find 9 times out of 10 the combination of being able to use the spot healing brush, the remove tool, also sometimes I'll use the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, and I'll also of course use content aware to be able to remove things in Photoshop. So I have a wider range of more effective tools to remove things in Photoshop than I do in Lightroom. And I think that is the entry level into Photoshop, probably why most people who are predominantly Lightroom users are using Photoshop, is for the remove functionalities that they have in Photoshop. Like, give us a shout there and tell me, guys, you know, are you guys using Photoshop to remove things in your pictures? Do you have that experience as well, where you feel sometimes Lightroom can let you down with trying to remove certain objects in Lightroom? Do you feel like Lightroom has improved a lot over the last kind of couple of years? I certainly feel like it's improved, but I don't think it's quite there yet. That's how I feel about it anyway. So I'm just going to take a little sip of wine, give me a chance for your, hopefully a couple of responses to come in to let me know what you think. And while that's happening, I'm going to close down this picture. Nicole is saying that she will use Photoshop now. Having seen that, it's definitely more versatile and more accurate for those sorts of things. Greg saying, yeah, uses Photoshop over Lightroom for major removals. And that's a good way of saying it, Greg. Honestly, I hope you're well, Greg. By the way, another man who likes the Nebbiolo. It's not Barolo tonight, Greg, but it is it's a producer. They make Barbaresco, Produttori di Barbaresco. So I'm just saying this because me and Greg have had a couple of glasses of wine together on a couple of workshops. Yeah, Jana's saying it's very frustrating. So really, Jana, the thing to do in terms of bridging that gap is to be able to combine using the healing brush, the generative AI, content aware and cloning. And when you're trying to remove something and it's not going well for you, break it down into smaller pieces. Okay, so if I'm looking at that shot there, you see the way when I just went at that one first, it really made a, you know what, of it. So it didn't do a good job there. But even in whether I'm in Lightroom or Photoshop, the thing to do would be to remove this little bit first. Okay, because then that creates a clear space here. And you're kind of telling the software then, it's clear space I want here. So break it down into little pieces and remove things that way. And sometimes you'll need different tools that will work a little bit better in those areas, but there's no question, irrespective of that methodology, that Photoshop is better at that. There's just, in my mind anyway, in my experience, there's no question about it. Vince is saying better control over Lightroom and a number of issues. However, Lightroom has improved a great deal, which I would totally sign up to and agree with you. I haven't used, do you know what Vince is saying? I really enjoyed the new landscape selection in Lightroom, which I tried while I was away, and it didn't do a wonderful job on my sea stacks in Oregon, honestly, Vince, but I will come back to it. I haven't edited since I've been home, and I didn't edit when I was away. I just kind of played with it a little bit while I was on a bit of downtime in the room, and I could see it was targeting specific parts of the picture, but when I tried to use it to subtract from the sky, it left it quite halo-y. But it was one picture, so it's not a great sample set for sure. Okay, so let's talk about Photoshop and Lightroom in the context of blending for dynamic range. So in this sphere, there's no question again that Photoshop has a greater range of tools for bringing files together. I guess the talk has already and will inevitably somewhat divulge into what Photoshop can do and what Lightroom can't do. But I just want you to bear in mind as well when we're having this discussion, as I did mention at the start, Lightroom can do an incredible amount. And for what's under the hood in Lightroom, it's enough for most people. And if you're not able to create proper directional shape in your pictures in Lightroom, then I wouldn't get too stressed out about Photoshop, because that's the most important thing in our photography, is being able to create interesting directional shape in our pictures. Okay, so blending. So really where I'm going with this, I know that in Lightroom we can hit merge to HDR and it will bring our files together, and it's a function that I use sometimes in my pictures. But what about in situations where the foregrounds are a little bit different? How is that going to work in Lightroom? So if we look at this shot, for example, from Iceland, you can see the shape of the water in the foreground in this lighter file. And then when I look in the darker file, you can see we have a totally different wave position in the foreground. Okay, totally different wave position. If we look at a couple of other shots here, again, you can see different wave positions in our foreground. Now, I have to say that sometimes Lightroom is very intelligent at working out which wave position you want. So it'll simply blend in the highlights in the lighter part of the sky and leave your foreground alone. And when I was experimenting earlier on some of these shots to kind of illustrate this point around texture and blending in Lightroom versus Photoshop, I took this picture from Fanet Head and I selected the 4 files, and I'll just go through them quickly. So you can see there's 4 files here, and they encompass the dynamic range of that scene. They have everything from the brightest highlight to the deepest shadow, okay? And while it has all that detail, and if we look in here, we can see all the highlights and the detail in the sky, it's totally absent from this one. Whereas this one, of course, has the shadow detail, bit of lens flare there, but nothing to stress about too much. But what it has is a totally different texture. So totally different texture. So the water is slow and smooth and silky in this one, whereas the water in this one is much harder and much sharper. So it has a totally different water texture. And that can be a problem in Lightroom for blending. So if I select the 4 of these and I hit merge to HDR, photo merge, and then HDR, and it's going to bring these files together. My experience earlier was that Lightroom actually did quite a good job on this. So it did bring the files together, and it kind of knew what foreground I wanted. It was miraculous. So if I just click merge here, and I'm not getting into, this isn't a tutorial on how to blend exposures, this is just a tutorial on Photoshop and Lightroom differences, so apologies if you have No idea what I'm doing in regards to the functionality of the software, but it's just probably not the appropriate moment to delve too deeply into that. I'm assuming as well by the lack of commentary about the sound that everything is that working okay with the sound. I can see there from Greg, have another glass of wine on me. I will, Greg. I will definitely do that. I will definitely do that. So let's have a look and see how it did. Okay, so here's the blend. Okay, the blend is never finished when you blend like that. I always leave the auto settings off because it makes the file look horrible when you have the auto settings on. So you always have to restore the dynamic range a little bit afterwards to get a natural look in your files. And I'm just going to quickly just restore the dynamic range a little bit in this file, just so we can have a proper look at the textures. Okay, so if we look at the foreground in this blended shot now has the detail here, and it has the detail there. It's not perfect. The contrast looks quite off still, to be honest, but just for argument's sake, for what we're discussing. And we have the smooth texture in the foreground. And if we compare that file to this one, let's say, the texture looks fairly similar, even though I know this one's brighter, obviously, but if we bring that down like that, and we compare these two files, the texture looks very similar, certainly in here. If we look at this one again, a little bit different. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong file. Let's have a look at the texture here. A little bit different in this blended file, but nothing like too funky or weird or anything like that. So Lightroom has actually done a good job of automate blending files with totally different texture. Again, I would say bravo to Lightroom, because, you know, a couple of years ago you tried to blend seascapes with different textures, and again, I'll use my Dublin slang on it, it made a of it. And you know what I mean if you're from Dublin. You can put it in the commentary there, but I better not say it on the live feed. So with files with different textures, you can certainly try and give it a go in Lightroom, and there's a reasonable chance that it'll work out okay. But what about files which have a totally different foreground and a different sky? And here's a shot from the Dolomites, okay? And basically I was up there in Cicada, and the mist was on the mountain, and I was waiting for the sun to come up and come up and come up and come up, and the sun just appeared over the horizon, and then the mist blew off. So I didn't get the sky with the sun star and the foreground with the mist at the same moment. So if I go to blend these together, again, software might figure it out, but I'd much rather manual blend a situation like this, where I have very definite control over the foreground versus the sky. Okay, and how I do that is I'm going to manually blend the shots in Photoshop. Okay, and essentially when I'm manual blending, then what I'm doing is I'm just taking one, I'm putting it on top of the other one, and then I'm ripping off a strip. The strip in this case is the sky, so we're going to see the sky and the foreground that we want. We're going to see them merged together, but also blended independent of each other. The situation hasn't been automated, so we have absolute control of what part of the sky comes in. I will have to say that while I sometimes do my preliminary editing in Camera Raw, when I'm blending exposures, I always do it in Lightroom, because Lightroom is great in the sense that it allows you to bring the files directly into Photoshop as layers ready to blend. So in this scenario, for example, I'm just going to try and match the files a little bit. So I'm going to make this one a little bit darker, so it blends a little bit better with the foreground. Going to add a little radial in there, just to give a little bit of feeling of light. And I'm going to warm it a little bit too in the foreground, because we're going to blend in that sun star. So we're just going to give that little bit of impression of light in the foreground with that radial. Then I'm going to look at my file that has the sun star. Looks a little bit dark over this side versus the foreground file that I want to blend in. So I'm just going to lighten that just a little bit. And then from Lightroom, the great thing, as I mentioned here, is that we can bring them in together. So I just select both files right click, edit in, and I can open as layers in Photoshop. So that'll bring the files in together and ready to blend. If you really know what you're doing, you can open them as smart object layers in Photoshop, and we're going to talk about smart objects before we finish out this discussion as well, because that's something else where Photoshop really excels. So if I open as layers in Photoshop, open away, here they come. Dun, dun, dun. It's time to have a sip of wine quickly. There we go. So there's the two files now. I tend to put the file that is got most of the information down the bottom, which tends to be the foreground file. So I've just reversed the orders of the layers, and then I work with black masks. So I create a white mask and I invert it to turn it to a black mask by hitting Command I. Again, I'm not going to explain how masks and layers and all that works in this tutorial, but I have posted a link in the description which will give you some insight on that. So I'm going to select the sky in this case. And once I've selected the sky, I'm then going to take a radial. I'm going to make sure it's on white, and it's on white to black up here as well. And I'm going to bring in that sky. And now I've managed to blend a lot of that sky in. I know it would still need some work, for example, around that transition zone where that sun star is. Let me just try and work a little bit of that in. We'll do that with a low opacity and just bring in that star there. So there you go. You can see how I've essentially managed to blend the misty shot with the star shot. We can try it in Lightroom. Let's see how it does. Lightroom is probably going to screw me over now and do an absolutely perfect job of it. HDR. I really hope it makes a mess of this, because that would definitely suit the narrative. But let's see how it does. It might figure out. It's got so much better. Honestly, no, it hasn't. Thank God. Even if we hit the auto settings, you can see how it's kind of brought it in, but it doesn't have our star coming down the bottom. It has figured out that the mist should be in the foreground and there should be detail in the sky, but those auto settings are always way over the top. But we can see with this edited version, look how much more natural that is, and how that sun star is just peeking over the corner in a much better way. So I hope that proves the point that while Lightroom has advanced loads in terms of blending, when the textures or some of the elements in the foreground differ a little bit, it doesn't always do great with bringing things together. Examples of that in the mist one I've shown you. Another example of that is the wave motion, that sometimes it doesn't bring well together. This is an easy wave motion shot because it's quite blank, but what if I was, trying to shoot waves that were rolling right in and up to the frame with loads of shape and texture? I can say with a decent amount of certainty that Lightroom would also make a mess of that, because the textures would be so different. Okay. Another example of that is, let's say a shot like this where I've got a sky and light on the ridge that I like here, but I've got this little bit of water that I want in the foreground here. Again, in Photoshop, let's just kind of make this black and white for the fun, because it looks better in black and white. Let's lighten the blacks. Let's lift the blacks off the bottom of the curve. Let's darken it down to create some mood, and let's lift those whites. Okay, so I've done a really quick, crude black and white edit on it, but it looks a little bit better. I'm going to take that black and white edit and I'm going to select the other file. I'm going to sync it, hit check all, and apply all the adjustments to the first file, to the second file. So there we go. So we've got this little foreground line here, but the sky is much better, and the light on the rock is much better here. I don't think Lightroom will be able to blend that together for us. So I'm going to select the two files. I'm going to right click, edit in, and I'm going to open as a layers in Photoshop. And here we go. Open anyway. Great opportunity to sip the wine. There we go. It's coming, it's coming. just checking out my Facebook feed here while it's coming. It's making sure everything is working efficiently. I think we're okay. I think things have worked this week. It's a miracle. Okay. So we have two files open. We have the file underneath. This is, to me, the predominant file in this situation. It's the most information we want. So I'm going to make sure that that layer is at the bottom. The bit I want to bring in, I put on the top. I add a layer mask, and then I make the layer mask black. That's always my process. I said it on the last one. The file that has the most information goes down the bottom. Then we add another file to the top, and then we start to blend in. So in this case, I can just, it's a black mask, go on white because it's a black mask. I'll turn the opacity up to 100%, and I can just quite easily bring in that foreground line then. And then I've got a combination of the wave action in one shot and the slow exposure for the sky in the other shot. So again, that's a very key functionality of Photoshop that allows us to blend. So think about it this way. Lightroom is automating the blend. It's just stacking things on top of themselves, and then it's making its best educated decision about what elements to include or to exclude. Whereas with Photoshop, you're specifically deciding what factors to include or exclude, and that can be really important in certain contexts, as we've just seen in those last two pictures. So any questions on that, guys? Feel free to pop them in. I can see Christelle is asking me, when blending images with such a dark exposure, is noise a problem? Yeah, so noise is a problem with dark exposures. And the two examples that I've just shown there, that's why I had the lighter exposure, for example, for the mist in the foreground. Look, ideally we don't want to lift very dark shadows because it will introduce noise and grain. And that's the whole reason to sort of, or a big part of the reason to make multiple exposures. Otherwise we'd just expose everything for the highlights and constantly lift the shadows. And sometimes that is something that you have to do because there's so much movement and there's no getting away from it. But it's something that we'd rather avoid if we can, you know. Okay, a couple of more examples to finish off the evening. So we looked at remove, we looked at textures and blending, and I just wanted to show you one more thing that that I do quite a lot in Photoshop versus Lightroom. So double processing files for selective color adjustments. Actually, let's make that go the other way. So in this particular scene, what I want to do is make the warmer tones in it warmer and make the cooler tones in the picture cooler. So I can definitely do that to a good degree in Lightroom. So I can grab the color range tool and I'm going to select these lighter tones here. Got them pretty good. And I'm going to make those warmer. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate and invert that mask. And I'm going to make the other tones around it a little bit bluer. And you can see quite quickly, if I reset it, how that's done a really nice job on the color balance of this aerial shot in Iceland. What it hasn't done though, what I would actually like to do is, you can see how these yellows are lighter, okay, versus the yellows in this point in the river here. Now, there's probably a certain amount of work I could do in Lightroom to target those areas. So for example, I could draw a radial on here and intersect it with the yellow colors in the river. And that would help me to brighten up little points like this. But when I have very specific areas that I want to lighten or adjust in this way, I always bring it into Photoshop and I double process the file. So I would hit edit in, and I was open as a smart object in Photoshop. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up a file in Photoshop that acts as a smart object, and it allows me access back into the raw information. So it'd be quite common for me to create multiple versions of the same file and then blend them together in Photoshop like I'm about to do now. So I have said file, okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it and hit new smart object via copy. Okay, so that's creating a second copy, and then I can go back into the raw information, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lighten the whites in this file, something like that, which is overdone in large parts of the file but looks pretty good in other parts. So I'm going to click OK. And now I have a lighter file. My darker file is my predominant file, so I'm going to leave that on the bottom, add the layer mask, and invert it to black to hide it. And once I've done that, I'm then going to use a luminosity mask to select these lighter areas. Now I could just select the yellow areas. I could potentially use a color mask, but I'm going to go with a luminosity mask because I think that will work quite well. Lights 2. Let's make that a little bit more contrasty, that mask. Something like that. Then load it on as a selection now. And now once that's loaded on as a selection, with a low opacity of about 20%, I can start to lighten those yellows in those specific areas. And this is a sort of a concluding example, shall we say, of how Photoshop can be just that little bit more targeted than Lightroom, okay? Because it's really allowing me to just get in on those specific parts of the river that I want to get in on. So that double processing technique is one that I use all the time when I'm editing my pictures, and whether I start in Lightroom or I finish in Lightroom, I'm regularly double processing, so I'm creating multiple versions of the same file, so basically 2 different iterations of the raw file, and then I'm blending them together with the masks in Photoshop because they're just that bit more accurate. They're absolutely that bit more accurate. So if that made your head spin though, of creating those masks and using smart objects and things like that, there's a possibility that Lightroom has more than you're ever going to want in your whole life in terms of your post-processing. You know, Lightroom has so much and the functionality is so good in there that you may never want to leave. My experience is that I'm either in Lightroom or Camera Raw for about 60-70% of my editing, but then the final bit of finesse nearly always comes in Photoshop. And the final bit of finesse for me is normally that example that I just showed you, where I essentially make a lighter version of a second file and then I blend parts of that into the file through a mask, through smart object blending, which starts in Lightroom but advances into Photoshop. And Lightroom is definitely lacking in that little bit of finesse to do that. So that was a quick run through of some of the key differences for me. I tried to kind of just pick out some of the more significant elements as they appear to me. So it's removing stuff, it's being able to blend and fully control texture in Photoshop, and it's that really advanced dodging and burning which happens when you create 2 versions of the same file and then you blend elements of them together through the luminosity masks. But if that all made your head spin, Lightroom does a brilliant job, and if you're happy in there and you're getting great results and you don't have a desire to pursue that technical challenge that comes in Photoshop, then, you know, by all means, just stay in Lightroom because it's pretty damn amazing as well. So that's it, guys. I don't have anything more to say. I can't see any more comments coming in there, so I'm a little bit nervous that the stream dropped in some way or other, as has been the case with the technological output of these talks at times. So I hope that it's been okay, and I just want to thank you all for coming this evening. Really appreciate you taking the time, and there's more of these coming. So until next time, cheers. I'll have a little sip of my wine to sign off, and that's it. Oh, some people are coming. It's working. Steve is saying, enjoy the wine, bottles are multiplying there. Steve, the selection at the back is always the same. I've just changed the camera angle. Just that wide angle, you know, makes everything look bigger. I'm shooting this with the 14 to 24, so that must be it. Becky says she was totally overwhelmed there for a few minutes, and you know what, Becky, I kind of did that deliberately in a way, in the sense that I wasn't trying to explain per se what was in Photoshop, because I wanted to make the point that Photoshop was more advanced than Lightroom in terms of the technical understanding that's required to use it. But there's no question it is a sharper knife than Lightroom. Like it is a sharper knife, but it's a harder knife to yield or to wield would be probably the proper word there, and there's no question about that. So round up, learn how to use Lightroom properly, learn how to create proper directional shape in your picture. If you're already doing that in Lightroom, then by all means jump into Photoshop and try and learn the masks, but don't go there if your head was spinning from what you just saw. Anyway, that's it. Good night. Signing off. Take it easy, guys. Good luck. Bye-bye.